Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. We are now going through the book titled Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion by Emile Coue, published in 1922. It is in the public domain. If you're new to my channel and found us at this video, please do visit our book playlist and grab the previous chapters. In the previous sections, we were going through some of the testimonials that was not only shared by the clients of Mr. Coue, but also from some of his own pupils or disciples, as it is mentioned in the book. And it is only a testimony that this method not only has been very successful to cure ailments, but also that it's a method that is self-applied and also others can use to help others as well. So who would think that simple words such as every day, in every way, I am getting better and better, could have such an overpowering effect over the will and tapping into the conscious realm of the great force that is in seeing us as perfect individuals and working and conspiring to make it so. And as I said in some of my other videos, I shared my own testimonials that I've had, quite a few, not only as a physical thing in my personal practice, but also in my well-being. I'm moving on to the next section titled The Miracle Within. Reprinted from the Renaissance Politique, Littéraire et Artistique of the 18th of December 1920. Homage to Emile Coue. In the course of the month of September 1920, I opened for the first time the book of Charles Baudouin of Geneva, professor at the Institute of J.J. Rousseau in that town. This work, published by the firm of Delachaux and Nissel, 26 Rue Saint-Dominique, Paris, is called Suggestion et Autosuggestion. The author has dedicated it to Emile Coue, the initiator and benefactor, with deep gratitude. I read it and did not put down the book until I had reached the end. The fact is that it contains the very simple exposition of a magnificently humanitarian work, founded on a theory which may appear childish just because it is within the scope of everyone. And if everyone puts it into practice, the greatest good will proceed from it. After more than 20 years of indefatigable work, Emile Coue, who at the present time lives at Nancy, where he lately followed the work and experiments of Lebault, the father of the doctrine of suggestions, for more than 20 years, I say, Coue has been occupied exclusively with this question, but particularly in order to bring his fellow creatures to cultivate autosuggestion. At the beginning of the century, Coue had attained the object of his researches and had disengaged the general and immense force of autosuggestion. After innumerable experiments on thousands of subjects, he showed the action of the unconscious in organic cases. This is new, and the great merit of this profoundly modest learned man is to have found a remedy for terrible ills, reputed incurable or terribly painful, without any hope of relief. As I cannot enter here into long scientific details, I will content myself by saying how the learned man of Nancy practices his method. The chiseled epitome of a whole life of patient researches and of ceaseless observations is a brief formula which is to be repeated morning and evening. It must be said in a low voice, with the eyes closed, in a position favorable to the relaxing of the muscular system. It may be in bed, or it may be in an easy chair, and in a tone of voice as if one were reciting a litany. Here are the magic words. Every day, in every respect, I am getting better and better. They must be said 20 times following, with the help of a string with 20 knots in it, which serves as a rosary. This material detail has its importance. It ensures mechanical recitation, which is essential. While articulating these words, which are registered by the unconscious, one must not think of anything particular, neither of one's illness nor of one's troubles. One must be passive, just with the desire that all may be for the best. The formula, in every respect, has a general effect. This desire must be expressed without passion, without will, with gentleness, but with absolute confidence. For Emile Coue, at the moment of autosuggestion, does not call in the will in any way. On the contrary, there must be no question of the will at the moment, but the imagination, the great motive force infinitely more active than that which is usually invoked. The imagination alone must be brought into play. Have confidence in yourself, says this good counselor. Believe firmly that all will be well. And indeed, all is well for those who have faith fortified by perseverance. As deeds talk louder than words, I will tell you what happened to myself before I had ever seen Mr. Coue. I must go back then to the month of September, when I opened Mr. Charles Baudouin's volume. At the end of a substantial exposition, the author enumerates the cure of illnesses such as enteritis, eczema, stammering, dumbness, a sinus dating from 20 years back which had necessitated even operations, metritis, salpingitis, fibrous tumors, varicose veins, etc. Lastly, and above all, deep tubercular sores and the last stages of phthisis, case of Madame D. of Troyes, aged 30 years, who has become a mother since her cure. Case was followed up, but there was no relapse. All this is often testified to by doctors in attendance on the patients. These examples impressed me profoundly. There was the miracle. It was not a question of nerves, but of ills which medicine attacks without success. This cure of tuberculosis was a revelation to me. Having suffered for 2 years from acute neuritis in the face, I was in horrible pain. 4 doctors, 2 of them specialists, had pronounced the sentence which would be enough of itself alone to increase the trouble by its fatal influence on the mind. Nothing to be done. This nothing to be done had been for me the worst of autosuggestions. In possession of the formula, every day in every respect, etc., I recited it with a faith which, although it had come suddenly, was none the less capable of removing mountains and throwing down shawls and scarves bareheaded. I went into the garden in the rain and wind, repeating gently, I am going to be cured. I shall have no more neuritis. It is going away. It will not come back, etc. The next day I was cured, and never any more since have I suffered from this abominable complaint, which did not allow me to take a step out of doors and made life unbearable. It was an immense joy. The incredulous will say, it was all nervous. Obviously, and I give them this first point. But delighted with the result, I tried the Coue method for an oedema of the left ankle, resulting from an affection of the kidneys reputed incurable. In 2 days, the oedema had disappeared. I then treated fatigue and mental depression, etc. An extraordinary improvement was produced, and I had but one idea, to go to Nancy to thank my benefactor. I went there and found the excellent man, attractive by his goodness and simplicity, who has become my friend. It was indispensable to see him in his field of action. He invited me to a popular séance. I heard a concert of gratitude. Lesions in the lungs, displaced organs, asthma, Pott's disease, paralysis, the whole deadly horde of diseases were being put to flight. I saw a paralytic who sat contorted and twisted in his chair get up and walk. Mr. Coue had spoken. He demanded confidence, great, immense confidence in oneself. He said, "Learn to cure yourselves. You can do so. I have never cured anyone. The power is within you yourselves. Call upon your spirit. Make it act for your physical and mental good, and it will come. It will cure you. You will be strong and happy." Having spoken, Coue approached the paralytic. "You heard what I said. Do you believe that you will walk?" "Yes." "Very well then, get up." The woman got up. She walked and went around the garden. The miracle was accomplished. A young girl with Pott's disease, whose vertebral column became straight again after 3 visits, told me what an intense happiness it was to feel herself coming back to life after having thought herself a hopeless case. 3 women, cured of lesions in the lungs, expressed their delight at going back to work and to a normal life. Coue, in the midst of those people whom he loves, seemed to me a being apart, for this man ignores money. All his work is gratuitous, and his extraordinary disinterestedness forbids his taking a farthing for it. "I owe you something," I said to him. "I simply owe you everything." "No, only the pleasure I shall have from your continuing to keep well." An irresistible sympathy attracts one to this simple-minded philanthropist. Arm in arm, we walked around the kitchen garden, which he cultivates himself, getting up early to do so. Practically a vegetarian, he considers with satisfaction the results of his work. And then the serious conversation goes on. In your mind, you possess an unlimited power. It acts on matter if we know how to domesticate it. The imagination is like a horse without a bridle. If such a horse is pulling the carriage in which you are, he may do all sorts of foolish things and take you to your death. But harness him properly, drive him with a sure hand, and he will go wherever you like. Thus it is with the mind, the imagination. They must be directed for our own good. Autosuggestion, formulated with the lips, is an order which the unconscious receives. It carries it out unknown to ourselves, and above all, at night, so that the evening autosuggestion is the most important. It gives marvelous results. When you feel a physical pain, add the formula. It is going away. Very quickly repeat it in a kind of droning voice, placing your hand on the part where you feel the pain or on the forehead if it is a mental distress. For the method acts very efficaciously on the mind. After having called in the help of the soul for the body, one can ask it again for all the circumstances and difficulties of life. There also I know from experience that events can be singularly modified by this process. You know it today, and you will know it better still by reading Mr. Baudon's book, and then his pamphlet, Culture de la Force Morale, and then lastly the little succinct treatise written by Mr. Coue himself, Self-Mastery. All these works may be found at Mr. Coue's. If, however, I have been able to inspire in you the desire of making this excellent pilgrimage yourself, you will go to Nancy to fetch the booklet. Like myself, you will love this unique man, unique by reason of his noble charity and of his love for his fellows, as Christ taught it. Like myself, also, you will be cured physically and mentally. Life will seem to you better and more beautiful. That surely is worth the trouble of trying for. Mr. Bernard Provence. End of section. Stay right here with me as we continue on to read the next section, titled Some Notes on the Journey of Mr. Coue to Paris in October 1919. The desire that the teachings of Mr. Coue in Paris last October should not be lost to others has urged me to write them down. Putting aside this time the numerous people, physically or mentally ill, who have seen their troubles lessen and disappear as the result of his beneficent treatment, let us begin by quoting just a few of his teachings. Question: why is it that I do not obtain better results although I use your method in prayer? Answer: because probably at the back of your mind there is an unconscious doubt, or because you make efforts. Now, remember that efforts are determined by the will. If you bring the will into play, you run a serious risk of bringing the imagination into play too, but in the contrary direction, which brings about just the reverse of what you desire. Question: what are we to do when something troubles us? Answer: when something happens that troubles you, repeat at once, "No, that does not trouble me at all, not in the least. The fact is rather agreeable than otherwise." In short, the idea is to work ourselves up in a good sense instead of in a bad. 1. That every idea that we have in our minds becomes true for us and has a tendency to transform itself into action. 2. That when there is a conflict between the imagination and the will, it is always the imagination which wins, and in this case we do exactly the contrary of what we wish to do. 3. That it is easy for us to put into our minds without any effort the idea that we wish to have, since we have been able without effort to think in succession, "I cannot," and then "I can." The preliminary experiments should not be repeated at home. Alone, one is often unable to put oneself in the right physical and mental conditions. There is a risk of failure, and in this case, one's self-confidence is shaken. Question: when one is in pain, one cannot help thinking of one's trouble. Answer: do not be afraid to think of it. On the contrary, do think of it, but to say to it, "I am not afraid of you." If you go anywhere and a dog rushes at you barking, look at it firmly in the eyes and it will not bite you. But if you fear it, if you turn back, he will soon have his teeth in your legs. And if one does a retreat? Answer: go backwards. Question: how can we realize what we desire? Answer: by often repeating what you desire. "I am gaining assurance," and you will do so. "My memory is improving," and it really does so. "I am becoming absolutely master of myself," and you find that you are becoming so. If you say the contrary, it is the contrary which will come about. What you say persistently and very quickly comes to pass, within the domain of the reasonable, of course. Some testimonies. A young lady to another lady: "How simple it is! There is nothing to add to it. He seems inspired. Do you not think that there are beings who radiate influence?" An eminent Parisian doctor to numerous doctors surrounding him: "I have entirely come over to the ideas of Mr. Coue." A polytechnician, a severe critic, thus defines Mr. Coue: "He is a power." Yes, he is a power of goodness, without mercy for the bad autosuggestions of the defeatist type, but indefatigably painstaking, active, and smiling to help everyone to develop their personality and to teach them to cure themselves, which is the characteristic of his beneficent method. How could one fail to desire from the depths of one's heart that all might understand and seize the good news that Mr. Coue brings? It is the awakening possible for everyone of the personal power which he has received of being happy and well. It is, if one consents, the full development of this power which can transform one's life. Then, and it is not quite rightly so, it is the strict duty and at the same time the happiness of those who have been initiated to spread by every possible means the knowledge of this wonderful method, the happy results of which have been recognized and verified by thousands of persons, to make it known to those who suffer, who are sad, or who are overburdened, to all, and to help them to put it into practice. Then, thinking of France, triumphant but bruised, of her defenders, victorious but mutilated, of all the physical and moral suffering entailed by the war, may those who have the power, the greatest power ever seen to man is the power of doing good, Socrates, see that the inexhaustible reservoir of physical and moral forces that the method puts within our reach may soon become the patrimony of all the nation and through it of humanity. Signed by Madame Emile Leon, collaborator in Paris of Mr. Emile Coue. End of section. We will stay right here in this video as we move on to the next section. Before we do, take a minute and hit that like button. Thank you so very much. The next section is titled Everything for Everyone by Madame Emile Leon, disciple of Mr. Coue. When one has been able to take advantage of a great benefit, when this benefit is within reach of everyone, although almost everyone is ignorant of it, is it not an urgent and absolute duty for those who are initiated to make it known to those around them? For all can make their own the amazing result of the Emile Coue method. To drive away pain is much, but how much more is it to lead into the possession of a new life all those who suffer? Last April, we had the visit of Mr. Emile Coue at Paris, and here are some of his teachings. Question of a theist. I think it is unworthy of the Eternal to make our obedience to his will depend on what Mr. Coue calls a trick or mechanical process, conscious autosuggestion. Mr. Coue. Whether we wish it or not, our imagination always overrules our will when they are in conflict. We can lead it into the right path indicated by our reason, by consciously employing the mechanical process that we employ unconsciously, often to lead into the wrong. And the thoughtful questioner says to herself, yes, it is true. In this elevated sphere of thought, conscious autosuggestion has the power to free us from obstacles created by ourselves, which might, as it were, put a veil between us and God, just as a piece of stuff hanging in a window can prevent the sun from coming into a room. Question. How ought to set about bringing those dear to one who may be suffering to make themselves good autosuggestions which would set them free? Answer. Do not insist or lecture them about it. Just remind them simply that I advise them to make an autosuggestion with the conviction that they will obtain the result they want. Question. How is one to explain to oneself and to explain to others that the repetition of the same words, I am going to sleep, it is going away, etc., has the power to produce the effect, and above all, so powerful an effect that it is a certain one? Answer. The repetition of the same words forces one to think them, and when we think them, they become true for us and transform themselves into reality. Question: how is one to keep inwardly the mastery of oneself? Answer: to be a master of oneself, it is enough to think that one is so, and in order to think it, one should often repeat it without making any effort. Question: and outwardly, how is one to keep one's liberty? Answer: self-mastery applies just as much physically as mentally. Question. Affirmation. It is possible to escape trouble or sadness if we do not do as we should. It would not be just, and autosuggestion cannot and ought not to prevent just suffering. Mr. Coue, very seriously and affirmatively. Certainly and assuredly it ought not to be so, but it is so often, at any rate, for a time. Question. Why did that patient who has been entirely cured continually have those terrible attacks? Answer. He expected his attacks, he feared them, and so he provoked them. If this gentleman gets well into his mind the idea that he will have no more attacks, he will not have any. If he thinks that he will have them, he will indeed do so. Question. In what does your method differ from others? Answer. The difference in my method is that it is not the will which rules us but the imagination. That is the basis, the fundamental basis. Question. Will you give me a summary of your method for Madame R, who is doing an important work? Mr. E. Coue. Here is the summary of the method in a few words. Contrary to what is taught, it is not our will which makes us act, but our imagination, the unconscious. If we often do act as we will, it is because at the same time we think that we can. If it is not so, we do exactly the reverse of what we wish. Example. The more a person with insomnia determines to sleep, the more excited she becomes. The more we try to remember a name which we think we have forgotten, the more it escapes us. It comes back only in your mind. You replace the idea, I have forgotten, by the idea, it will come back. The more we strive to prevent ourselves from laughing, the more our laughter bursts out. The more we determine to avoid an obstacle when learning to bicycle, the more we rush upon it. We must then apply ourselves to directing our imagination, which now directs us. In this way, we easily arrive at becoming masters of ourselves physically and morally. How are we to arrive at this result? By the practice of conscious auto-suggestion. Conscious auto-suggestion is based on this principle. Every idea that we have in our mind becomes true for us and tends to realize itself. Thus, if we desire something, we can obtain it at the end of a more or less long time if we often repeat that this thing is going to come or to disappear according to whether it is a good quality or a fault, either physical or mental. Everything is included by employing night and morning, the general formula. Every day, in every respect, I am getting better and better. Question. For those who are sad, who are in distress? Answer. As long as you think, I am sad, you cannot be cheerful. And in order to think something, it is enough to say without effort, I do think this thing blank. As to the distress, it will disappear, however violent it may be. That I can affirm. A man arrives bent, dragging himself painfully along, leaning on 2 sticks. He has on his face an expression of dull depression. As the hall is filling up, Mr. Coue enters. After having questioned this man, he says to him something like this: "So you have bad rheumatism for 32 years and you cannot walk. Don't be afraid. It's not going to last as long as that again." Then, after the preliminary experiments, shut your eyes and repeat very quickly indeed, moving your lips, the words, "It is going, it is going." At the same time, Mr. Coue passes his hand over the legs of the patient for 20 to 25 seconds. "Now you are no longer in pain. Get up and walk." The patient walks quickly, quicker, more quickly still. "And since you can walk so well, you're going to run. Run, monsieur, run." The patient runs joyously, almost as if he had recovered his youth. To his great astonishment, and also to that of the numerous persons present at the séance of April 27, 1990, clinic of Dr. Berillon, a lady declares, "My husband suffered from attacks of asthma for many years. He had such difficulty in breathing that we feared a fatal issue. His medical advisor, Dr. X, had given him up. He was almost radically cured of his attacks after only one visit from Mr. Coue." A young woman comes to thank Mr. Coue with lively gratitude. Her doctor, Dr. Vacher, who was with her in the room, says that the cerebral edema from which she had suffered for a long while, which he had not succeeded in checking by the usual means, had disappeared as if by magic through the use of conscious auto-suggestion. Another person who had had a fractured leg and could not walk without pain and limping could at once walk normally. No more pain, no more limping. In the hall, which thrills with interest, joyful testimonies break out from numerous persons who have been relieved or cured. A doctor: "Autosuggestion is the weapon of healing. As to this philosopher who writes, he mentions his name. He relies on the genius of Coue." A gentleman, a former magistrate, whom a lady had asked to express his appreciation, exclaims in a moved tone, "I cannot put my appreciation into words. I think it is admirable." A woman of the world, excited by the disappearance of her sufferings, "Oh, Mr. Coue, one could kneel to you. You are the merciful God." Another lady, very much impressed herself, rectifies, "No, his messenger." An aged lady: "It is delightful, when one is aged and fragile, to replace a feeling of general ill health by that of refreshment and general well-being, and Mr. Coue's method can, I affirm, for I have proved it, produce this happy result, which is all the more complete and lasting, since it relies on all-powerful force which is within us." A warmly sympathetic voice calls him the modest name he prefers to that of master, Professor Coue. A young woman who has been entirely won over, Mr. Coue goes straight to his aim, attains it with success, and is setting free his patient, carries generosity and knowledge to its highest point, since he leaves to the patient himself the merit of his liberation and the use of a marvelous power. A literary man, whom a lady asked to write a little chef d'oeuvre on the beneficent method, refuses absolutely, emphasizing the simple words which, used according to the method, help to make all suffering disappear. "It is going away. That is the chef d'oeuvre," he affirms. And the thousands of sick folks who have been relieved or cured will not contradict him. A lady who has suffered much declares, "In rereading the method, I find it more and more superior to the development it has inspired. There is really nothing to take away nor add to this method. All that is left is to spread it. I shall do so in every possible way." And now, in conclusion, I will say, although Mr. Coue's modesty makes him reply to everyone, "I have no magnetic fluid. I have no influence. I have never cured anybody. My disciples obtain the same results as myself. I can say in all sincerity that they tend to do so, instructed as they are in the valuable method, and when, in some far distant future, the thrilling voice of its author called to a higher sphere can no longer teach it here below, the method, his work, will help in aiding, comforting, and curing thousands and thousands of human beings. It must be immortal and communicated to the entire world by generous friends. For the man of letters was right and knew how to illuminate in a word this true, simple, and marvelous help in conquering pain. It is going away. There is the chef d'oeuvre. Signed, B.K. Emile Leon, Paris, June 6, 1920. End of section. And also end of the reading of the book titled Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. And have you applied any of these methods? Leave me your comment. Every day, in every way, we are getting better and better. Please, if you haven't done so, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with your friends.